valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, welcome to the Valuations Podcast, brought to you by Trulytics, the premier business intelligence platform for the wealth management industry. My name is Mike Langford, and I'll be your host. And this is episode 4, and it's a really special one because we have our first ever guest from outside of the Trulytics organization on the show today. So what you'll be hearing is me interviewing a gentleman by the name of Shane Morrow. He is one of the founders and managing partner and director of investments at IronBridge Wealth Counsel. He's based here in Austin, Texas, but they have offices in Boca Raton, Scottsdale, and I want to say there's one other office there. You'll hear him mention the other office location in the podcast towards the end, near the end of our conversation there. One little word of patience, I guess, is the right way to say. Please have a little bit of patience while you're listening to this podcast, because we did record this episode at a restaurant over drinks, so you will hear some background noise, and you'll actually get to hear a baby who decided that he or she wanted to announce his or her presence towards the end of the podcast there. But it's very manageable. Sound quality is really good. You'll just hear some background noise there. What made Shane a very exciting guest to have on is he is on the side of the equation where if you're thinking about succession and transition for your business, he would probably end up being what a likely acquirer would look like. He and his firm, IronBridge, might look like that. He's a young gentleman. He's in his 30s. His partners are young. They are a growing firm, a relatively new firm, and they're looking at things with fresh eyes. Like if you had to design a business right now in 2018, what might it look like, right? And those are going to be the firms of the future that are going to be acquiring businesses. So if you are doing your succession planning, if you are looking at your valuation with an eye toward transitioning out of the business someday, a firm like IronBridge might be the type of firm that comes knocking on your door and saying, we might want to acquire you. Now, on the flip side of that, if you are a young firm or a young advisor looking to grow through potential acquisition or shape your business in the way that you think it should be shaped in 2018 and beyond, this is a fantastic podcast for you as well, because we're talking a lot about like, what does the market look like now? What are some of the trends in the industry? And where do we see some kind of mismatches with some of the established firms and their ability to serve the trends like millennial audiences and female investors and so forth. So really, really good stuff here. Absolute pleasure to have Shane on the show. And I have a feeling it would not be surprising if he popped on the show at some other time in the future, because he was an excellent guest. He and I hit it off, and I really liked having him. If you have questions for me, for Shane, please do hit us up, valuations@trulytics.com. You can also swing by the Trulytics website and go ahead and use a contact form there. Or you can also ping us on social, right? Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. You'll find Trulytics there really easily. We're very responsive, on those social networks. So feel free to hit us up. Okay. Well, without further ado, let's dive in. Here we go. Let's do it. All right, sir. Shane Morrow, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to have you.
Mike, thanks for having me.
So thanks for coming out. This is great. So we are just going to let everybody know, if you hear a little bit of clinking in the background, we are having a couple of beers for this podcast, which is, this might be a trend. It's fun. I used to have a thing where I don't drink at lunch. This is going back like 15 years ago. Like, I don't drink at lunch. And then I did this show called Nom X3, which was a lunch show where we went out and filmed ourselves eating lunch. And at first, we didn't have beers on the show. And then sure enough, my co-host Jeff ordered beers, and it became a function of the show. So
starting a trend.
It happens, right? It's Friday. So we're having some recreational beverages while we have the show. Again, welcome to the show, Shane. Really excited. I thought we'd kind of kick it off by you just kind of chatting about how IronBridge, your IronBridge Wealth Counsel journey, like how you came to be starting the company, number one, and the journey that brought you to kind of some of the assumptions that are baked into what you see as kind of a new brand of wealth management firm.
Sure. No, Well, so I'll give you I guess the quick and dirty in the evolution of IronBridge. And I think part of it started in my undergrad. So I was an economics major at Amherst College, which is relatively impractical in terms of a major. But what it really taught me is critical thinking. You go to liberal arts school, as I did, in a small, highly competitive environment. You learn pretty quickly that if you don't take disparative ideas and boil them down to the essence of what they intrinsically are trying to convey, you're going to get left behind pretty quickly. So it served as a really good foundation in terms of what I see in the investment advisory world is a industry in flux or in evolution, and we're taking a lot of different components from technology, business management, financial services traditionally, and blending them into the future of what that becomes. So I would say my background in critical thinking and liberal arts really helped with that perspective. But after college, about a week after, I started an institutional consulting firm focused on private wealth, high net worth, and smaller institutions. Smaller shop. We ran about $2 billion of assets under consultation and really cut my teeth there from working my way up as an analyst all the way to I was a director of investment consulting in charge of the firm-wide asset allocation decisions at probably an age that I wouldn't have at a larger firm, which was great because I got firsthand experience sitting across the table from high net worth individuals who thought I was probably younger than their grandson at the time, because I was, and talking to them about their hard-earned life savings. So it's great to see the technical side and get that experience, and then also the human side, which is, at the end of the day, probably the most important part. And it took me a while in that evolution to realize being the smartest guy in the room doesn't always win the day. You have to connect with someone across the table and relate, and it took me a number of years to really have that set in. So after that, I left after about 10 years for various reasons and went to New York City, worked with a Fortune 100 company and helped them build out their investment wealth management platform. So I got to see more of the technology build out, the tech stack, I guess you would say, the implementation, how it's utilized in the field force across a wide range of advisor business models, et cetera. And also had a great 2 years in New York City and realized corporate world wasn't for me. Yeah. So a learning lesson in a lot of different areas. Had an opportunity to come down to Austin, spend about a year or so in an institutional fixed income firm here down here, learning and got a really good education on institutional liability management, meaning how do pensions, endowments, hospital operating accounts work in a very academic way to manage a set stream of liabilities. Yeah. So I look at those three different, I would say, stops along the way as my residency in this industry, and really got hands-on experience along the way to really come to the conclusion that at the end of the day, I have an entrepreneurial nature, and I wanted to do things the way I envisioned, or at least if I was going to fail, I was going to fail on my terms. So I was fortunate enough to kind of partner up with a couple of my old colleagues, and we started IronBridge with the knowledge that we wanted to build a practice that was an advocate for our clients. We wanted to do things the right way, have a very strong academic and institutional background, but be able to deliver to, I would say, the private wealth client, which I saw as a giant gap in terms of the industry.
That's really interesting. You mentioned something kind of early at the early part of that introduction for yourself. Early in your career, you had to learn to relate to people, and it's funny. That's like something I bang the drum on that like all the time with people. Like, look, for the most part, there's most of the financial products are commodities, right? Like if you think you have a unique portfolio, you're probably not all that unique, right? Everybody has access to the same.
Or ignorant.
Right, exactly. Everybody has access to the same stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, by and large. Most of the financial modeling stuff has been around for a while, and people, everybody has access to it. Right. When a client decides to do business with you, they're choosing you, right? They decided they relate to you, like they can tell you care about them.
Right.
It's interesting. It kind of bridges my next topic. It makes an iron bridge. to the next topic, actually. There we go, right? You have the name Wealth Counsel, and you actually mentioned, earlier in your experience that you talked about, you used the phrase counsel as well, under counsel, you said for the assets.
Yes.
And it's a relatively unique way, or a relatively rare way to refer to the business. I'd like to kind of hear your perspective on why you're choosing counsel versus under advisory or under management. What's the significance of that?
Yeah, so part of it's tied into the significance of the name IronBridge. The significance, if you look historically, even though we're in Austin, a lot of people think it's the Penny Bacher Brigade chair. It actually had nothing to do with it. There's an iron bridge in England, the quote-unquote iron bridge. If you look it up on Wikipedia, it's historical. It was the first bridge, or one of the first bridges of the Industrial Revolution to be made of iron, cast iron. And the town of IronBridge now is kind of known as the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. Okay. So we kind of look at the historical nature of the industry changing, kind of a revolution or evolution in our industry, and it had some historical meaning. I didn't want to be, Morrow Financial or et cetera. I wanted to have a lasting name, historic name. You go through all the Latin names and all that other stuff. But it had a great name to it. There's a professional connection of kind of bridge building, connecting to the future. The idea you need to build something structurally sound enough yet flexible and dynamic to move with nature. And then there was a personal meaning for myself and a couple of my partners who have done Ironman. So a bunch of them have done actual Ironman races. So you
couldn't use Ironman without getting sued into oblivion, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's become now the Ironman. No tattoos on it, but yeah, we've done a bunch of Ironman races. So when you look at that and you look at counsel, which is more of a traditional British way of looking at a lawyer or providing advice, it's just fit naturally, because what we wanted to do is be known first and foremost for providing advice and being advocates for our clients. Yeah. The product sale, all that other stuff, which is what our industry is known for, is so much further down the line. Yeah. And we really wanted to be known first and foremost as someone can look across the table and know they're getting really great objective advice, regardless of what the implementation is. So it was more of kind of a personal branding that we wanted to separate ourselves from the industry on.
That's fantastic. I love it. So it's interesting. I love that in your story as well. You mentioned that you got high-level access at a very young age, and I feel a kinship there because at 26 years old, I worked directly for the chief financial officer of State Street Corporation in Boston. Yeah. It was Ron O'Kelly at the time, and Marsh Carter was the CEO then, and everything. So, as a really young dude, relatively early out of school, I'm like in a Fortune 500, boardroom meeting with executives. I didn't have any power, but it was really, really cool to kind of be there, soaking it in. And I actually, wrote for the alumni magazine at State Street not too long ago about how it kind of sowed the seeds for my life, right? In terms of the things I learned. Exactly. It just really informed the way that I approach things and the way that I see the world. I wonder if you what you kind of see as some of the leadership lessons. I mean, you're a leader now, right? You're one of the partners in the company. You're obviously trying to grow it into something really, really special from where you've grown it already. What are some of the leadership lessons you think you've kind of adopted along the way?
Yeah, I would say there's I would say two primary lessons from that experience. One was our firm was very successful in the 90s when I joined in 2004. It built up a great reputation, great success, but the industry had evolved, and they didn't evolve quick enough with the industry and found themselves slowly falling further and further behind. So one of the first lessons that I really learned was that if you're not constantly evolving or challenging the way you do business and the thought process, doesn't mean you have to change and reinvent yourself each year or two, but you have to constantly be stress testing how you do things and does it still make sense in this current environment. If you don't do that, eventually competition will come in and eat your lunch. And that was a really great lesson in terms of don't rest on your laurels and to constantly challenge and look outside to see what's going on in the industry, take lessons from other industries, people, consultants, whatever it may be, to constantly try to improve. So that was one really good lesson that I learned. The second one was people matter. One of my first bosses said, at the end of the day, it's not the X's and the O's, it's the Jimmys and the Joes.
Okay, I like that.
And, building the great team around you is paramount. So I learned that lesson pretty quickly. I was an offensive lineman in college, so I'm used to being in that team environment and working collaboratively. And I think that for me kind of reinforced the need to not just have great ideas and execution, but have good team members around you that you also can trust and rely on. So I would say those are really two great takeaways I got from that formative year that it just reinforced from my experience.
That's interesting. I love it. It's funny. It kind of feeds into the kind of the next area I want to chat about is because that team is going to be with you for years to come, hopefully, right? And they're going to evolve. Maybe some of them will leave, and you'll get new ones and so forth. But you're kind of forming your vision of what you want for the future, right? And who's going to run with you. And I love diving into the future. It's one of my favorite topics. Early this week, I published a video in which I mentioned that advisors and wealth management firms really need to start thinking about themselves as futurists, right? And what I mean by that is, look, 2018 in many ways looks nothing like 1998, right? I mean, think about. I often tell people I am the last adult generation, last of the adults to become adults before the internet was a thing, right? I graduated college in 1995, right as the World Wide Web was happening. So I remember being an adult, I went to college with a typewriter, right? That's exactly. And there was no internet. We had a computer lab, but
one for the whole campus.
That was it. And I can remember getting my first cell phone. I can remember seeing the first car phone that I'd ever seen in my life. It's kind of I always joke about it. My great-grandmother, she told me this story about seeing a car for the first time and how much that blew my mind. And this woman was born in 1903.
That's crazy.
She saw a car for the first time. She flew on airplanes and she saw a man land on the moon and all that type of stuff, right?
Yes.
She passed away before the internet. But when I think about what's coming for the future, and you and I kind of before we started recording, we're chatting about our kids may never drive cars; they may just Uber it everywhere.
Exactly.
When we think about our clients, their lives are going to be different. Their children's lives are going to be different, and the pace of change is happening rapidly. So when we look at 2038, 2048, which is probably in the timeline of your clients, especially if you got millennial clients.
I know.
Things are going to be different there. So you and I were kind of riffing the other day about some of the things that you see, and you had some thoughts that I hadn't thought about, but I thought maybe we could dive into them.
Yeah, I think that's a great area because I think at the end of the day, I listened to that video. If anyone hasn't, it's a great video. This is something that advisors should think about. Because I look at, to your original point about lessons I learned from my prior company, if you're not thinking about those things, someone else is.
Sure.
And you need to at least understand kind of what the landscape is and how it's changing. I think it's going to be really interesting over the next 10, 15, 20 years because I think we're kind of on the cusp. I look at the financial services industry as so far behind in technological adoption that there's so much potential and so much change that could happen in a small window to get caught up with other industries, let's say. I think part of it is going to be a greater separation of advisors that fully adopt and utilize technology to the best that it can be. I don't mean that robots are going to replace humans and, this whole doom and gloom that advisors aren't going to exist. I think a lot of advisors won't be replaced, but they have a good enough relationship with the clients that they may not leave, but they probably won't be replaced. But those advisors that can really leverage the technology as the world changes as quickly as it has been, I think what we're going to see is more financial metrics and data are going to be more like a Fitbit per se, or health metric tracking, where you're going to get real-time data on a frequent basis that's going to track how you're progressing to certain defined goals. And the problem is not the data. The problem is the interpretation of that data. So we're talking before about changing jobs and being flexible and kind of modeling in sabbaticals or, time off or lifestyle change or whatever the dynamics may be. And I think those things will happen at a more frequent basis. And if you don't have that data readily available and tracked and available, you're going to get left behind because people are going to want to demand it. You're going to want to demand real-time information, not just on what my heart rate is or what my weight is or my sleep patterns, but also on my financial success or the probability of financial success.
Sure.
And it's going to be much more dynamic. And the role of the advisor I see in that place is not necessarily plugging in the data on Excel spreadsheets, but it's the interpretation of that data. I look at the healthcare world as a similar maybe story where a doctor's not going in there and doing your blood pressure. He's coming in after that stuff tracked and interpreting that for what does it mean for your lifestyle needs. How do you need to change your healthcare, what medicine you need to go on, whatever it may be. So it's more an interpretation of the data and leveraging technology so that you can give people more live, dynamic, thoughtful advice on how they should make those decisions given that data set.
It's interesting you mentioned the doctor parallel. I remember, this might have been about 10 years ago, when I went into a doctor, because we were still living in Massachusetts, so I went into my primary care doctor, and he came in and he had one of those convertible laptops that turns into a tablet at the time. And that was before the iPad, I think, even existed. And I was thrilled. I was like, finally, somebody isn't just like making stuff up. Right? He's actually consulting data. He's looking at, and some of the answers he would give you when you had a question, a health question about something, you're like, I'm pretty sure that's coming from WebMD. Like he's actually consulting it. Like he's actually looking it up. But I'm like, well, that's good. Because one of the biggest challenges, I actually read articles about this, like a lot of physicians, the older they get, the further they are away from the research and the new, because you've been out of medical school for 30 years.
You get comfortable.
Yeah, you just forgot about it, right? So you're just kind of set in your ways. And so having extra tools, having the tech isn't going to necessarily replace the advisor. It's actually going to augment and make them more effective and adaptive, right?
Well, look at something that's going on right now, the World Series. Look at baseball. Yeah. You think about Billy Ball, Billy Beane in the A's, with the movie with Brad Pitt.
Yeah, Moneyball,
Moneyball, right? He didn't GM still exists, but now they have data sets, they have information, they have things that they can make more educated decisions on how to win baseball games. And I look at that to a certain degree as the role of advisor is to help put on the field or position clients as best as possible for success, however they define it. But we need the data and the information that is going to be more and more real time to make those judgment calls.
Right, and it's funny. Pull that back to the whole purpose of Truelytics and the valuations podcast, right? It's that's the goal for Truelytics is like, hey, look, how do you know if the things that you're doing in your business or your individual practice are increasing the value or adding value, or they're detrimental, or just helping you kind of keep afloat, right? Everything you do to your business will either increase the value of the business or potentially decrease the value of business, right? And so having some benchmarking in there to look at other comps, if you will, right? Other advisors and wealth management firms that look like yours in terms of AUM and structure and so forth. And then having the ability to track the changes that you implement over time. That helps you manage your business.
One of the most basic things about dieting or health, right, is that what gets tracked gets improved. And so if you don't know what that data is, how do you know how to allocate time, resources? So maybe this is a generational issue, but I'm so used to being inundated with data and information that it's weird in the financial service industry. There's not more of that. And I think what you're potentially going to see, to your point about valuation metrics and tracking, is that there's going to be a divergence in the advisor world where you're going to see people that I look at the advisor world as almost two separate groups of people. Maybe this is an oversimplification. You have salespeople that happen to be in the financial service industry and advisors that happen to have a business or think they have a business. And you have business people that are in the business of financial service. And I think those are potential, people look at it as semantics, but those are fundamentally different mindsets. The one guy looks on his, commission run or his GDC payout or whatever it may be and says, hey, I made top line of X, I paid out my staff Y, and my take home is Z. And that's what they look as their profit. They don't look at, or their take home, they don't look at it as, well, my salary baked in on a competitive basis is Y, and then the rest is profit distribution. And think about it from a business owner, because when they look at things like hiring, staffing, allocation of capital, they're all looking at that as, that's just going to detract from my take home. they're not looking at how does that increase or decrease my intrinsic value of my business.
Right.
If you're not tracking the valuation of the business, how do you know those decisions, how they can impact and model it into the system?
Yeah, I love that. You mentioned it's a simplification, of course, but I love that you brought that up. That some people are basically salespeople, kind of looking at what's their take-home commission check, and then other people are building a legit business. And it's true. I say all the time, you got to look at many of the advisors who may be listening to this, or the practice managers who are listening to this. Many of them got their start when they were still called stockbrokers, right? And they were given a list of names, or insurance salespeople, and they would just, here's a list of names to call, right? Or you go to get a list, and you start dialing for dollars, right? You start calling on people in person, and so as a result, they grew up being sales guys or gals. Most of them are dudes. That's just reality. Just banging the numbers, right? It was a law of large numbers.
The more people you call, you get one to say yes.
Exactly. So you know what it's going to look like. But over time, you evolved into more of a fiduciary, relationship management type role, and you started to look at it like a business. And those who have looked at it as a business have done very well. And it's not to say you can't do well as a sales.
No, it's a great living. It's a great lifestyle. Yeah. What my personal beef is that you go to conferences and you hear all about these people that want to be looked at as business owners and one big trade, working with business owners and succession planning. And I'm sit in the back and I laugh because you put the mirror to most of the advisors' own business practices, and they're woefully naked in terms of how they're the exact same disturbing questions they're asking potential clients. If you were to ask them, what's your succession model? What's the valuation of your company? How are you going to transition the next 5-10 years? What happens if you get hit by the bus? They don't really have good answers to those. And so, it's a very easy, I think it's easier to undress and kind of get to the heart of what someone is. Yeah. And they're both great lifestyles.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We were just writing Terry Mullen, CEO of Truelytics, and I were working on a presentation that he's going to be making up soon. And one of the things I suggested is that very thing, the most important advice you're giving to your clients, right, is something you should follow yourself, right? Is that, look, at some point in time, you need to advise your clients that I'm thinking of transitioning out of this business. I have a succession plan, and when I leave this business, I want you to go with the person I have chosen.
Right.
That's going to be really important for your client because now they have a roadmap for what happens after you. But it's also going to be really important for yourself and your family and your legacy because God forbid something happens to you before succession happens. You plan succession, if you pass away or you become incapacitated, your family's going to count on the ability to sell that business and exit the business, right?
I 100% agree, and that's why I look at that. You can address those questions relatively easily. You start asking people, what's your succession rate? What has it been communicated to clients? What's the valuation that you factor into the model? All those things that if you're looking at a tech startup or a private business, construction company, those are things that they have to have in place.
Right.
And the advisor world has really evolved, as you said, from stockbroker or salespeople, from stock or insurance salespeople to quote unquote advisors. But a lot of times it's the same person that started out. The industry is not mature enough in the sense of you had the same people that were successful that the people that were not as good salespeople got weeded out.
Right. It's 100% true. It's funny. There's another, if you want to call it getting weeded out, but there's that big transition's coming, right? I think Truelytics guys are talking about. There's the transition wave is coming, right? The average age of an advisor now is over 50. Many of them getting closer to 60. So it is inevitable that there will be this wave of people who are exiting the business. Kind of like you might advise to your client, hey, listen, eventually you will retire. Either you'll choose to, or the world will stop paying you for what you do.
Or you go out horizontally or you go out vertically.
Right, it's going to happen.
Either you die or you.
Yeah, and you and I were chatting on the phone, and you mentioned something. It was funny. You did it unsolicited. And I was like, 100%. I've actually beaten this drum. That it's not a seller's market, right? And on the Truelytics side, we talk about about, look, it's always the buyer drives valuation, right? Because you are worth what somebody's willing to pay you for your business. It's just that's what stock
economics
is worth.
101.
Well, it's what stocks. People always get mad at the guys who are chartists, if you will, and they're like, look, it's just that the price is baked in. The price assumes all known information.
Yes.
The price is the price. It's whatever somebody's willing to pay for you. But you had some really interesting thoughts on why you believe it's not a seller's market.
So there's a couple of, maybe going back to my economics degree, I think you look at the industry, and anytime there's asymmetric information, the person with that information has more of the power.
Sure.
And companies like Truelytics and the democratization of information now has made that information more widely available. And you look at a lot of firms, they're talking about valuation metrics and things you need to factor in. And the power is not as much in the hands of the seller as it was now because the information is out there. So that's one thing in that, you have a more symmetric information set. Second thing is that if you look at the real estate world, right? If you may have a great house, you have your own unique quirks that you've lived in it for 20 years, but guess what? That's your house for 20 years. If I'm going to go come in there with my own family and a different set of, idea of style and whatever it may be, I'm not going to place the same value that you do that you've lived in that. So I think to a certain degree, the advisor world has gone from, it's a very idiosyncratic, almost residential market where we need to move to more of the commercial real estate world, where there's benchmarking, there's set parameters. And at the end of the day, you may love that, sconce and all the other setup in the house, but I don't really like it. Yeah. So I'm not going to pay you for it. Yeah. And I think there's going to be the realization that, hey, your kid's not that good looking. And that's a hard thing to swallow for a lot of people, that this baby that they built up for the last 20, 30 years is not that attractive.
Sure.
Because the reality is, you look at it, most advisors practice, right? They've worked the first couple of years, they worked with whoever they could. They built up those clients, then they transition and work with people maybe they want to work with, and you kind of move up that chain. And the reality is they probably have still a lot of those initial clients that just because they've been there. So if I'm coming in as a buyer, I'm going to look at your practice and say, great, there's about 60 to 70% of this practice that I think is very attractive. There's a component of it that's worth zero to me because frankly, it's not that appealing. It doesn't fit my business model, culture, whatever it may be. So why am I going to pay you a generic high level, 2 times revenue, whatever you pulled out of the sky for this revenue stream that I don't think is worth that, because you start to look down into the different rooms, they're not really that well put together. Right. So that's why I think there's a lot of hoopla at conferences, and I sit back and I just disagree because there's not that many buyers. Yeah. There's not that many legitimate, let me clarify, not that many legitimate buyers.
Sure. Well, it's not only there's not that many buyers, because it's funny, I saw a stat, I'm doing a little research or something I'm writing, and it was like, last year there was 178 RIA deals, like sales. Like 178 is not a really large number.
No.
Especially when you're in a country with 330 million people.
Right.
It's not that many business sales. So that's really interesting. That's fascinating. It's when you're going on the house thing. My wife and I just saw a house come on the market on a street that we like in River Place, and we're considering a move in the next year. So we're kind of really keeping an eye on everything that's in there. And it's this gorgeous house. It has curb appeal for days. It just looks like, I wanted to see what that house looks like on the inside. And you look at it, whoever lived in this house, so it almost looks like a French chateau on the outside. It's like, this Georgian colonial, looks really pretty. Like just the landscaping on the front looks amazing. And you go inside and they tried to turn it into this like ultra modern, like shiny brand new tile floors throughout the, it looks nothing like the style of the house. And it's one of those, like, my wife and I turned to each other, like, I would offer them $100,000 less for that house because I'm going to have to rip out every single floor in that house. And
100% agree. You talk to most advisors and it looks great from them on stage getting their awards. When you peel back the onion, they're not efficiently run. They don't have systems and processes in place that are repeatable. It's really about them, and there's just personally, I think there's just way too much ego in our industry. Yeah. And it's just a matter of if there is a bear market, if there is a slowdown, people will become more and more desperate because 65-year-old advisors don't want to go through 2008 again in terms of having to call clients, keep things in place. And I think there's going to be a smaller and smaller window for them to monetize out. And at some point, supply demand takes into effect. And that's why I just don't personally think it's a seller's market. I also don't think it's a buyer's market.
Yeah.
I think it's people need to really work hard to figure out cultural systems matches, which takes a while to do. Because you're talking about a clientele that someone's built up for years, and you're talking about their financial livelihood. This is not transactional that we're talking about transitioning someone to. So if I'm going to work with you, Mike, and come in as a new advisor, you're going to want to know me as a person, know my process, systems, which I think to do it well, it takes years.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned, you said something to me, I'm trying to find it, like I made a note about it. You know, you talked about finding the soul of the business. And it really kind of spoke to me because, I spent a lot of time in marketing, advising firms and occasionally individual advisors on their target marketing practices and how to go to market and how to position themselves. And I don't want to go as big as to say it was really deep, Shane, what you said, but it was really, I thought it was really important.
I thought it was deep.
It was super deep.
Yeah.
I was like, it was great.
I was impressed.
It was nice and fluffy and cuddly. No, but it is, because again, going back to the beginning of our conversation, it's a relationship business. You are connecting with people, but talk a little bit about what you meant by, finding the soul in the business.
Yeah, I guess I think part of what I was talking, I remember I was at an INCA conference once. Now I know they've changed their name. But I was for some reason or another just disillusioned. I stepped out of the session. I was just walking down the hallways, and I was smacked with the reality that most of these people here are trying to figure out different strategies, techniques. And I know I'm being potentially overly cynical.
Sure.
But maybe it's a generalization, but I think sometimes it needs to be said that a lot of times we're just trying to figure out ways to make money off other people's money. And you miss the purpose and reason for what we're doing. And a lot of times you'll ask a group of advisors, why do you go in this business? And they say, I just want to really help people. And I'm just not buying that. I'm calling them out. I don't know.
You responded to an ad that said basically, if you can flog a mirror, come here. We'll teach you how to make money in the stock market.
Right. And I get it. Everyone's a salesperson. My father, maybe I'm different because I grew up in a law enforcement household. My father's a DE agent, and I grew up watching him, arrest bad people.
Okay.
And going into this business, I had this really hard time saying, I don't want to do sales. And he said, listen, at the end of the day, everyone's a salesperson. I'm going out there and buying drugs from a drug dealer. I'm convincing him that I can do certain things and things like that. So there's a sales component that you have to have in every business. So I acknowledge that. But the other part of it is I feel like sometimes we get so wrapped up into awards and GC and commission, you kind of miss at the end of the day what you wake up and look forward to. And yes, we have those successes with clients to help them really on the path. But I get really, disillusioned for the most part with the industry in general, because it's the whole cliche Simon Sinek, start with why. There's a missing of the why.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, you look at websites now, you look at marketing pieces, they all say, which is generic, right? Our why is to help people provide custom solutions, blah, 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 blah. It's all kind of redundant, and repetitive and things like that. And I had to really, do my own soul searching and say, what do I want to accomplish? What do we at IronBridge want to accomplish for people? And it really is about protecting. That's the way I looked at it, tying into the counsel thing. It's about protecting people from themselves, from the future, from insecurity, from unknowns that can happen in the marketplace. And that at the heart is what we try to accomplish. And the soul doesn't mean just what do we do on a daily basis, but how does that impact the other activities that your culture, like the charity work that you do as a firm, all those other things that shouldn't really go noticed by the outside world, but are felt internally at a cultural level.
Right.
And I guess the soul I was talking about is when I was talking to my father about it, there's challenges and stress about every industry. But he said at the end of the day, I believed in the mission.
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes, if you ask employees, forget the CEO or the lead advisor, if you ask their employees, what's your mission? What's your, culture? What's the soul of your firm? I think there would a lot of times be hard to communicate that well.
Right.
And I think that's part of what I meant by the lack of the soul, is that you look internally at how people treat their staff, their employees, their partners, that's the most important thing. And then that outwardly gets communicated to the clients, and people see that. You know, the whole Southwest model. Our employees come first type thing. And I think that's what I meant by the soul, is that you need to really focus on building the culture internally first and foremost, because that's gonna transcend all those different aspects of how you talk with clients, how you communicate, how you steer them when things are tough, or how you present things and things like that. So
that's great. It's interesting. It's funny. I'll have to talk. I almost feel like we need to tell the Trulytics guys, like, hey, build in a employee satisfaction score into the valuation, right? For firms, because it actually does matter, right?
100%.
Especially if you come to a point of succession. If you're buying a firm, you're not just buying assets, right? You're bringing this team on because you're hoping that the relationships continue. That's actually a really good point. So if you guys are paying attention, hopefully you're listening to your own podcast.
That should be a discount. That will, if I put my nerdy hat on, that's going to affect the discount rate
100%.
either up or down, depending on how stable it is.
But if you knew, hey, some sort of anonymous 360 review of like how happy are you here and all that type of stuff. If you're buying a happy business, you're going to buy something really good. That's fantastic. So Shane, we're coming to the end of things here. Really quick, in a couple of a minute or so. What do you feel beyond that you guys really obviously have a soul? What do you think kind of makes you stand up for the crowd? Like, who's the ideal type of client? If somebody is looking for IronBridge and wants to work, like, how do you
differentiate yourself?
If you differentiate yourself, tell us what makes you special.
Well, maybe I'll tie it into, without being self-promoting, tied into kind of the future, because I think the future is going to be specialization. And really, not just, if you look at, again, the medical professions, you don't go to a general doctor if you have a heart problem. And so what we look at, our differentiation is, how do we really identify our clientele exceptionally well and really specialize in those areas. So our channels are medical professionals, law enforcement, philanthropic individuals. This includes small foundations. And the overarching philosophy is that we provide financial guidance for those who serve others. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of wealthy people. There's a lot of people you could do business with. We need to know who we want to do business with. And then darn well better know those channels intimately well in terms of the nuances of the technical side, the emotional side, the communication side. And so we have these, I would say, different business channels. And I think that's a part of the differentiation, is we try to understand who we are, who we want to work, who we're good with working with, and focus on those areas. But I also think that for the future of the industry, if you don't specialize, it's going to be tougher and tougher to compete as a generalist. And I look at, if you were to really look at the future, I could foresee more and more of these roll-ups building on these different silos in terms of business channels. And I think that's a great opportunity for people that are looking to get bought, or at some point you build this channel, because there may be a big RIA roll-up that's looking for a focus in dentist, or a focus in who knows what, right? And so teachers. And so that's a great way for them to creatively add value to there as a firm and leverage the infrastructure they've built, and then ultimately have a unique kind of business channel. So
I think you're spot on that. I mean, I tell clients all the time, like, look, you need to have a target market, and you have to articulate, speak their language, number one, right? So, I mean, I call my clients, so do you, right? But other people call their clients customers. Accounts, sometimes users, right? If they're in the software business, and sometimes, guests and so forth. And so there's usually some specific language. There's things that are unique about the industry in terms of tenure and career progression. There's things that are unique in terms of stock option grants and the like, and their retirement plan structure. So the more you know about your client, the more specialized you are in the nuances of serving that client, and you can pitch yourself in, hey, we uniquely serve this client, or clients like this. You're going to be spot on in terms of your business. So in closing here, how can people find you and more about IronBridge? What's the best way to reach out to you? People are absolutely going to want to talk to you, I'm sure.
Well, we have a website. It's ironbridgewc.com. We have a Twitter page, IronBridge Info, at IronBridge Info, and then obviously on LinkedIn. So are the three. If you have to go to Facebook.
There you go. We'll find you. Okay.
Yeah, so we're out there, and I have a bunch of partners. We have an office in Scottsdale, Austin, Florida, and Farmington, New Mexico. So
all terrible places, apparently. Sounds like just places that people don't like to visit.
I went to school in Western Massachusetts, and I'm done with the winters.
That's what I say. I always say, like, hey, listen, winter is a nice place to visit.
There's planes that we can go visit those places.
That's really funny. Well, this has been fantastic. fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Mike.
All right. Thanks again.
All righty.
All right, brother.
All right, that was awesome, just like I promised, right? And by the way, how awesome was that baby towards the end there? Again, thank you very much for joining us. If you have questions or you want to see us cover other topics or have specific guests on the show, or if you want to be a guest on the show, love to chat with you. Hit us up, valuations@truelytics.com is the email address, or as I mentioned earlier, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. Follow us, like us, hit us up with some mentions. Love to talk to you there. And by the way, if you are not subscribed to the Truelytics newsletter, make sure you get to truelytics.com and subscribe, because, you know, it's free and it is awesome. All right. Thank you again. And I hope you have a wonderful week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.